listening to the Touch 'Em Up podcast. I'm your host, Double M, and on today's episode, we have UFC Fight Night Mexico City, Moreno versus Royval 2, taking place this upcoming Saturday from the CDMX Arena in Mexico City, with a banger of a rematch from the main event and the co-main event. First, in the co-main event, you have a rematch from a previous UFC Fight Night between top-ranked 145-pound contenders. First off, the former interim UFC featherweight champion in the number 3 ranked El Pantera Yair Rodrigues taking on the returning Brian T-City Ortega. Then, in the main event of the evening, a banger between two former title challengers at 125 pounds, one of them being a former champion in Brandon the Assassin Baby Moreno, taking on Brandon Raw Dog Royval in a rematch from UFC 255. So without any further ado, let's get this started and step into the ring. Alright, well, we're coming off of a pretty successful weekend at UFC 298. Ilia Topuria is the new UFC featherweight champion via second round knockout over Alexander the Great Volkanovski. And yeah, I mean, we called that one. Like I said, I love Volk, I love Topuria. I'm not somebody who's going to pick against these guys. I've never picked against either of those fighters in any fight that they've ever had. But I just knew it was Topuria's time. Volk started off good. He kept it at a distance and range that he wanted to keep it at. He was keeping him just outside of kicking range. He was keeping him at the end of his jab. And he was trying to, I believe he was trying to recreate the Jai Herbert knockdown where he caught Topuria with that lead head kick off that right hand, the pullback little bow and arrow effect, and cracked him on the chin. And listen, I think that I think Volk had the right game plan is what I was going to say. But at the same time, like, it was just a matter of time before Volkanovski got caught up against the cage, got trapped, and eventually got clipped with that big right hook. But you got to give credit to Topuria because he was staying so patient, even when he was getting hit with the inside low kicks, getting hit with the lead head kicks, getting his head snapped back with the jab. He was just trying to time it, parry it, and slip to the outside, time it, parry it, slip to the inside. He was trying to counter over the top with the overhand right, and eventually he just caught him up against the cage. He was able to use his footwork and use his angles to cut Volk off towards certain directions and trap him up against the fence. And the minute it went up against the cage, that's when Topuria unloaded, and he's the new champ. I don't think anybody's going to beat that guy for a long time. I think Topuria is going to have that belt for a very, very long time. Might even hold it for a couple of years. I think he's going to have a reign similar to Volk, and I don't see anybody beating him. I know people are going to say Movsar Evloev. I don't think Evloev beats Topuria. I just don't see it. Co-main event of the evening between Paulo Costa and Robert Whittaker. I had Costa in that fight. I think it was close, but I do think that Costa probably lost that decision. But I did have a play on Costa by KO in round 1 and round 2. And man, that wheel kick at the end of the first round where his legs went and he started doing the stanky leg. I really thought we were going to get it in the beginning of the second round with a big knockout from Costa, but he didn't pressure forward starting that second round. You could tell on the stool going into the second round that Whittaker was gone. Now he recovered, he was able to recover quick, but I think if Costa would have put the gas on a little bit more going into that second round, that I think Costa would have got the finish. I really think he could have put him out, but he stayed at a distance, he stayed at range, he tried to get his win back and find openings, and he should have just bum rushed and tried to take him out. Like, could he have gotten knocked out? Sure, and Costa was getting caught with the left hook of Robert Whittaker. He was getting caught with the jab as he stepped in, kept trying to constantly step back and counter with the lead hook, but man, I think Costa could have got that done if he just, put his foot on the gas to kick the round off. If you remember in the Duplessis fight, like, Duplessis hurt him at the end of the first round. And yeah, he took a little bit of time, but he came at Whittaker from the start of that second round until he eventually TKO'd him. And I really think that Costa could have done the same thing, but it is what it is. We ended up going 8-4. You could say 7-5, but on the day of the event, I ended up picking Miranda Maverick. I even put some bets on her to win by submission in round 2 and round 3. Almost got it a couple times, but, almost doesn't count. So we did end up going with Miranda Maverick the day of the fight, even though we picked Andre Ali on the podcast. So overall, 8-4. 67% accuracy rate. We're back on track. I'm hoping to keep it up and go 10-2, go 11-1, go undefeated on a card. Very hard to go undefeated on a card, but we're going to try our best, and we're going to try to keep the streak going with UFC Mexico City. It's a great fight card. There's so many good fights. I mean, from the first prelim to the main event, there's a lot of entertaining fights. There's a lot of fun fights, and I expect a lot of finishes on this card. So without wasting any more time, I think we should just kick it off and start it off with the prelims.
You know where you are, huh?
I want to fight with Chuck here. Fuck, Chuck.
All right, we're going to kick it off with the first prelim of the night in the UFC, what is it, bantamweight division or featherweight division? I believe it's featherweight, correct? Yeah, featherweight division, 145 pounds between Muhammad Naimov taking on Erick Silva. You've got the Hillman versus the King. I'm going to be honest. I know Erick Silva had a lot of hype coming off the Contender Series. He's a very good grappler, has good takedowns, good top control, and is eventually going to look to land vicious ground and pound where you will either give up your back, give up your neck, or give up a limb, and he can lock up a submission. Before he lost coming into the UFC, he was on I think a 5-fight win streak, and then he lost to downtown TJ Brown. TJ Brown was able to, I believe, he got him with a submission. Was it a submission via arm triangle choke. It was a year and 2 months ago, so about 14 months ago. And like I said, coming into the UFC, he has a lot of hype. He's coming out of Lobo Gym, which is where Diego Lopez also fights out of. And we haven't seen him in a long time. So being gone for a little bit over a year, you got to think, what is he going to look like? Because sometimes fighters come back after a long layoff and they look good. But most of the time they come back and they look out of it. They look out of shape. They look like they're not used to being in that area because it's been so long. And I kind of feel like Naimov coming off 2 back-to-back wins, almost 2 finishes, one over Jamie Malarkey in his UFC debut with a big right hand. I believe he caught him with a big right hook or a left hook as he was backing up against the cage and put him out. And then coming off that decision win over Nathaniel Wood, where Nathaniel Wood could have got a TKO in that third round. I mean, he was putting it on him. He was hurting him. He was rocking him. But early on, Naimov cracked him with a big shot, dropped him, and hurt him. And it looked like they were going to stop the fight by TKO. I think that this is a Muhammad Naimov spot all day. I mean, he's almost a 3-1 favorite, minus 270, minus 280. And I think he can stop the takedowns of Erick Silva. I think he can defend and keep it at kicking range, keep it in boxing range. And I think he's going to crack the chin of Erick Silva. Like, losing to a guy like TJ Brown, don't get me wrong, TJ Brown is a decent fighter. He has decent striking, good boxing, good wrestling. But I don't necessarily think he's UFC level. I've picked him on the podcast before, and, you know, I've been proven wrong in certain points. And I think Erick Silva is good, but I think this is a spot where you fade the Contender Series. You can't always, call it a Contender Series fade, but I think you can fade a guy like Erick Silva in this spot. I don't think he has the power to land the shots like Naimov does. I don't think he has the willingness to strike with Naimov. I think the takedowns are going to come out telegraphed, and I could see Silva, if he's able to really tire out Naimov in the second and third round, maybe he just overwhelms him, gets him on the ground and lands ground and pound, or gets a sub, where Naimov would kind of have to give up. But I don't even think we're going to get that far. I think the striking power, the technical ability with the kicking game, the boxing, the footwork, the movement, the counter game, I think it's too much for Erick Silva. I think Naimov is going to catch Silva coming in with a big shot, drop him, and get a TKO. I'm going to go Muhammad Naimov to defeat Erick Silva via a first-round TKO. I could see it being in round 2, but I'm going to go with round 1. I think he's going to catch Silva cold, catch him coming in, crack him with a big shot, and get him out of there. So give me Muhammad Naimov to go 3-0 in the UFC via first-round TKO over Erick King Silva. Up next, we have a fight that I'm very excited for, and it's mainly just excitement on one side. You have a flyweight bout between Victor Altamirano taking on Felipe Daytona dos Santos. I really like Dos Santos in this spot. I actually backed Dos Santos as an underdog. I picked Manel Cape on the podcast, I believe, but I backed Dos Santos as an underdog in the betting market because I knew there was something with this kid. I could tell when I was watching this guy fight that he had really technical striking, he had good pressure, and he comes out of the Shuto Box gym. Shuto Box, Mateus Mendonca, Charles Oliveira, this guy right here, Daniel Santos, the Willy Cat, they all have that shoot the box style where they're good technical kickboxers, really solid Muay Thai, but they move forward, they pressure, they don't care if they get hit, and they just get in your face and they dog it out. Anybody from Shuto Box is a dog, and Felipe Dos Santos fits that all the way around and checks every single box. Does he get clipped? Yes. He got clipped by Manel Cape early in the fight, got dropped, but was able to come back from it. And he even rocked and hurt Manel Cape a couple times on occasion. In the third round especially, he hit him right before the round ended, and you could tell he was on wobbly legs, and if, Santos could have followed up a little bit more, he might have been able to get Cape out of there. But to come in against a guy in Manel Cape who is touted as the next champion at 125 pounds, touted as one of the biggest and baddest contenders in the flyweight division, and to go back and forth and to be competitive with him when you were only supposed to be on the Contender Series and you took the fight on short notice, I don't really think Victor Altamirano is going to have much for him. Now, Altamirano, I backed him against Tim Elliott, but Tim Elliott was able to just take him down, rinse and repeat, grapple him. He got hurt by Altamirano with some shots to the body, some uppercuts and things like that. And I think if Altamirano is going to have success here, it's going to be a lot of head kicks, a lot of spinning kicks, or he's going to have to get on the inside and try to rough him up in the clinch. The one thing about the Shuto Box style is that they do get clipped, they do get wobbled, they do get hurt, they could get dropped, but they find ways to come back and they just push a pace that most people can't keep up with. I think Victor Altamirano is a good fighter. I think he's going to have the wrestling advantage, but I don't think he has the jiu-jitsu advantage. And I think the striking advantage in terms of technique, in terms of power, in terms of speed, I think that all goes to the side of Felipe Dos Santos. Dos Santos is like a minus 280. He was minus 305. I think some money came in on the side of Altamirano, and he's like minus 270, minus 280. If that line keeps dropping, anything minus 260 and lower than that, I think Felipe Dos Santos is a must bet in this spot. I love what I saw from this kid, and people are going to say, oh, well, he lost his debut. He got dropped. He went back and forth, strike for strike, with the number one contender in the flyweight division, or the guy who's touted to be the next champion. That's showing me more than enough, especially in this circumstance going up against Altamirano, who has not had the greatest showing in the UFC and dropped 2 fights back-to-back. Losing to Tim Elliott isn't a bad thing just because of the way he pushes forward, wrestles, and kind of embraces the grind. But Felipe Dos Santos, his boxing, his striking, his counter ability, the one thing I like the most about this kid is that he doesn't only throw 2 shots. Like, he'll throw 3, 4, 5, 6 punch combos where you might think like, oh, I slipped the first 2, I'm okay. And then he continues to push forward. He has grappling. He has good jiu-jitsu. He can look for submissions. I think Felipe Dos Santos finishes Victor Altamirano here. I actually like the under 2.5. It's at like plus 185. I know people are saying Altamirano's durable and this and that, but with the way Dos Santos fights and the grappling heavy style, the forward pressure, I think the under 2.5 is a really solid play in this fight. But I like Felipe Dos Santos all day. Give me Felipe Dos Santos to win via a second round TKO. I think he's going to just be able to outstrike Altamirano. He's going to catch Altamirano when Altamirano can't catch him. And like I said, I mean, there isn't much more I can say, but you could tell what side I'm on. I love this Felipe Dos Santos kid. I liked Felipe Dos Santos like months ago. I had him in like this big 13-leg parlay, which eventually ended up losing because of Joe Pyfer, but no shame in that. That always happens at a certain level in your MMA career. But yeah, I like Felipe Dos Santos here. I think he's better everywhere. I think he's the more dangerous fighter, and I think he gets a finish. Give me Felipe Dos Santos to defeat Victor Altamirano via second round TKO at UFC Fight Night Mexico City. Moving on to the next fight, we have Luis Lazy Boy Rodrigues taking on Denis Bondar. I'm going to be completely honest with you. I have not been impressed with anything that I've seen from Denis Bondar, at least in terms of the UFC record. He's 16-5 overall as a professional MMA fighter. But if you go and you look on like his actual overall record for Luis Rodrigues, he is sitting at a 15-2 record versus a 19-4 record, it says on Tapology, for Denis the Psycho Bondar, Luis Lazy Boy Rodrigues. Rodrigues is on a 5-fight win streak currently. His last fight 8 months ago via a TKO doctor stoppage, an ankle injury. Now, the guys he's beating, some of them don't have the greatest records, but if you're really looking at it, statistically, it's not that bad. He beat Angel Rodrigues, who was 11-11. In 11-11, it's like, okay, well, what's the point in even taking the fight? But he beat Jaime Londono at 5-1. He beat Victor Moreno, who was 5-0. He beat Cesar Vasquez, who was 5-1, and then Paul Moreno, who was 6-5. Denis Bondar lost his last fight to Carlos Hernandez via technical decision, but it was pretty much a body lock slam takedown with a head smacked right on his jaw. So it was technically a headbutt, but Bondar was getting the brakes beat off of him. He was going to lose that fight. It should have been a TKO. Either way, Carlos Hernandez comes up big in that spot. And then he lost to Malcolm Gordon. Even though it was a submission, it's marked as a TKO, but he caught him in like a weird armbar position, or like a Americana style armbar, like a reverse Americana, and eventually, snapped his shoulder and lost that fight. That was 2 years ago. His last fight was 8 months ago. The last fight for Rodrigues 8 months ago. Now, Rodrigues also fought on the Contender Series, and he lost a close decision to Jerome Rivera. That was back in August of 2020. Since then, he's gone on a 5-fight win streak with 3 finishes and 2 decisions. But Jerome Rivera, you got to take this into consideration. The dude's 10-6, and he couldn't buy a win in the UFC. He won the decision against Rodrigues on the Contender Series. Then he lost via knockout to Tyson Nam, lost the decision to Francisco Figueiredo, lost via knockout in 25 seconds against Ode Osborne, and then lost via submission to Zhalgas Zhumagulov, who's another fighter who really couldn't buy a win in the UFC recently, even though his fights were close and they went to a decision. The one thing I do like about Rodrigues is the fact that this guy is going to come forward. He's going to put the pressure on. He's got decent boxing, but his bread and butter is in his takedowns and his scrambles on the ground. He's got very good jiu-jitsu. He can wind up on the top. He can look for elbows. He can look for hammer fists. But even if you put him on his back, he's always going to be looking to butterfly sweep, looking to maintain, to get to the top position, looking to reverse, looking to go for submissions, looking for arm bars, jumps for guillotines. This guy is looking for a finish. And on the feet, he's not bad. He has good striking, decent boxing, decent kicking game, but the main power comes in his hands. And this guy, like I said, is looking for a finish. Out of his wins, 15-2, almost all of his wins come by way of finish. He's got 12 finishes out of his 15 wins. Denis Bondar, on the other hand, is currently 19-4. Out of his 19 victories, he's got 17 finishes and 2 decision losses. I don't think this fight goes to a decision. I think it finishes under 2.5. But I have not been impressed in the slightest by Denis Bondar. And I believe I picked him in his last fight, but I might have picked Carlos Hernandez. I'm not 100% sure. I feel like if I was intelligent, I picked Carlos Hernandez, but who really knows what I actually picked? I don't remember. But I think Bondar has decent striking, decent ability to use his jab and move forward. But I think this guy's kind of fragile. And I think with a fighter that has the finishing instinct of Rodrigues and doesn't live up to his name of lazy boy, he's definitely not lazy. He's coming to get that finish, whether it's on the ground via submission or on the feet when he knocks you the fuck out. I like Luis Rodrigues. I'm not super duper confident in it, but I would play Rodrigues over Bondar all day. I think Rodrigues is going to be coming looking for that finish. I think he has the grappling to hang with Bondar if it gets to the mat. And I think he's got the boxing ability to exploit the defensive holes of Bondar on the feet, who just hasn't impressed me at all inside the UFC thus far. So give me Luis Lazy Boy Rodrigues to win via a second round TKO over Denis Bondar. I think he finishes him. It could be a submission. I'm feeling a lot of second rounds today. I'm going to go with Luis Rodrigues, second round TKO over Denis Bondar. All right, up next, we've got a featherweight battle between Fares Smile Killer Ziam taking on the Prince of Peru, Claudio Puelles. 12-3 on the side of Claudio Puelles, 14-4 on the side of the Smile Killer Fares Ziam. We know this fight. It's striker versus grappler. Now, Puelles is basically jiu-jitsu or bust. He's got to get the takedowns. He's got to roll for leg locks. He's got to look for a submission. He's going to look to put Fares Ziam on his back or get on the back of Ziam and eventually lock up a submission. Maybe even get some control time in the meantime as well. Fares Ziam wants to keep this fight on the feet, but in the fight against Jai Herbert, he actually showcased some good takedowns, some good grappling, good cage pushing, and was able to beat a guy who rocked the current UFC featherweight champion in Ilia Topuria in Jai Herbert. He was able to beat him via a pretty clear decision. I believe it was a unanimous decision over Jai Herbert. That was 6 months ago. Prior to that, he got a unanimous decision over Michael Figlak, who I believe lost to... Did he lose to Mike Malott? I'm not 100% sure. Maybe I'm wrong. But either way, he lost to Terrence McKinney via rear naked choke. That was a year and 11 months ago. The Terrence McKinney loss is going to lead a lot of people to pick Puelles in this spot. And I understand it, and the logic is there. I feel like Claudio Puelles could take down Ziam, get on his back, and look to lock up a rear naked choke. I think that that's kind of his only way to win. I don't think he's going to be able to outstrike the technical and precise kickboxer in Ziam, who was able to hang, tit for tat with Jai Herbert on the feet, who doesn't have the best defense, but the guy is a very, very solid striker. Very clean, very technical, very crisp. And with this fight, I think if Puelles doesn't get the takedowns, I think Ziam beats the breaks off Claudio Puelles. Puelles has good low kicks, good body kicks. He mixes up his kicking game pretty well, but the boxing really isn't there. And if he doesn't get the takedowns, he starts to panic, and he kind of starts to wilt under the pressure, and he starts to take a lot of punches and eventually just gives up when the going gets tough. You look at Claudio Puelles losing to Dan Hooker. Now, I think Ziam would lose to Dan Hooker as well, but he was constantly getting, stabbed to the body, kicked to the body, kicked to the body, and he just couldn't take it. He tried to stay in, and he couldn't. And I think Ziam, even though I don't think he's nearly as good as Dan Hooker, I think he has the technical skills and the game plan and the style of fighting to kind of replicate a similar win by keeping it on the feet, keeping it at kicking range, front kicks to the body, 1-2s down the middle, knees to the body, but you got to watch out for the knees because you don't want Puelles to time it and then get a takedown, because we know that if Puelles gets the takedown that Ziam is going to be in trouble. But we saw in the fight against Jai Herbert, he improved his grappling, he improved his get-up game, he improved his offensive wrestling and grappling as well. So I think this is a Ziam spot all day. I think Ziam's going to kind of style on Puelles here. I think he's going to stop the takedowns. If he gets taken down, I think he gets back up and eventually just TKOs Claudio Puelles. I'll go with a third-round TKO for Smile Killer Ziam. He's going to kill the smile of Puelles. If you're backing Puelles, you're going to back Puelles by a submission. I mean, that's kind of his only way to win, is control time on the mat, getting a bunch of takedowns, or locking up a submission. But I'm not going to go with that. I'm going with the striker versus the grappler. Give me Smile Killer Ziam via a third-round TKO over Claudio Puelles. Daniel Lacerda versus Edgar Chairez for, I think, the fourth time. I've picked Lacerda every single time. This kid is good. He's got a lot of power. He's got good technique, good spinning kicks, good head kicks, good 1-2s. He's a shuto box style of fighter. He's going to come forward. He's going to look to, put you out. But the thing is, if he can't get that finish, he tends to slow down, and eventually he gets finished. He can't buy a win. I think he's 0-5-1 in his last 6 fights, especially because that no contest in his last one. But if you watch the last fight with Chairez and Lacerda, Lacerda got caught in that front choke. It was like an anaconda choke, or what did they call it? A Bravo choke. It was kind of like a Bravo choke, and the ref checked his arm. The arm went limp, and then when they broke the choke, he was up. I didn't go out. He was just trying to relax. I'm going to be honest, I think even if that choke was in a little bit longer, that Lacerda would have had to tap. I know he was trying to relax, but I think he would have got finished there. And I've gone with Lacerda every time because I see what this guy has to offer. I see the technical skills that he has on the feet. I see the power he possesses in his kicks. And, he hurt CJ Vergara multiple times in the first round with spinning wheel kicks, big head kicks, good punches, but he gasses out. And, once this fight hits the second round, Lacerda is going to gas, and I think that's where Chairez more than likely takes over. It's in Mexico City. If I'm picking from my heart, I want Lacerda to win. I like this guy's fighting style. I like how he leaves it all out on the table, but at this point, what can I do, in terms of making a pick? Because Lacerda hasn't shown me too much. He got a good takedown ahead on the inside single, dumped Chairez, got, the takedown in the last fight, but then when they got up, he got caught in that front choke. Every part of me wants to pick Lacerda because I want him to win, but at the same time, I'm going to pick Chairez. I'm going to pick Chairez to win this fight by submission again. I think he's going to get a rear naked choke or a guillotine. I think he's going to get a guillotine choke in the first round. and submit Daniel Lacerda. I want to pick Lacerda, like I said. If I was going to put money on it, I would put money on Lacerda, at least at this point. But I just don't think I can. So I'm going to go with Edgar Chairez, first round guillotine choke submission. But like I said, I want Lacerda to win, but I just can't pick him. Up next, a bantamweight bout a flyweight bout, even though it lists bantamweight divisional stats, between Jesus Aguilar taking on Mateus Mendonca. Listen, I think that this fight is actually pretty difficult to predict, and if I had to put money on one single fight, this would probably be one of the last ones that I pick. Because I feel like Mendonca is the better fighter. He has really good striking, good movement, uses his distance and range management pretty well, but he keeps his hands really low. And against a striker with the power of Jesus Aguilar, I think that he could potentially get clipped on the chin and hurt. And the one thing you don't want to do against a fighter like Aguilar is get hurt, because it's going to lead into his wheelhouse. This guy, out of his 9 wins, I think he has 8 wins by way of submission. I'm going to pull it up real quick. Aguilar, he's 9-2. But out of all of his wins, I think, 8 submissions or 7 submissions? 6 submission wins, 1 knockout, and 2 decisions. So 7 finishes out of 9 victories. When you look at Mateus Mendonca, similar record, 10-2. And out of his 10 victories, he has 3 decisions, 3 submissions, and 3 knockouts. So he's actually 9-2. I don't know why it says 10-2. But, identical records between the both of them. I think Mendonca is the better fighter, but I question his fight IQ. I feel like the decisions he makes in the middle of fights is a big problem, and it could be a problem against the grappler the caliber of Jesus Aguilar. Aguilar's going to be looking for necks. He's going to be looking to lock up that guillotine choke, and that's usually the submission of his choice. So I wouldn't expect Mateus Mendonca to be looking to shoot a lot of takedowns, but if he gets rocked and maybe falls to one knee or gets dropped and then tries to work his way back up to the feet, the minute he tries to work his way back up, I expect either an arm-in guillotine or a regular guillotine on his way up from Jesus Aguilar. So that's definitely something that Mendonca is going to have to look out for. I still have hope for Mendonca, but, him rolling for all those leg locks against Nate Maness and then, getting hit with a couple big shots and still not letting go of the leg lock, it was like, that's a big problem, because you don't see that, okay, this probably isn't working. I should probably abandon it and block so I don't get knocked out. But, DC, Daniel Cormier said it on the commentary that he chose to get knocked out because he got clipped with a big punch, a big shot, and he continued to hunt for leg locks even though he had both of his hands on Maness's leg and no hands or anything blocking his face. And eventually Maness just landed a big shot and then a couple more big shots, and the ref jumped in. He went out and then woke back up with the second punch. And that's just that's the thing. That's why I think it's not the best fight to bet on. I do think technical-wise, Mateus Mendonca is a lot better on the feet. I think power advantage probably goes to Aguilar. I think the grappling advantage goes to Jesus Aguilar, but we saw Mendonca rolling for leg locks, looking for takedowns, chaining takedown attempts together. I do worry about Mendonca, but I am going to pick him here because I feel like he's just a little bit better than Aguilar, and I feel like inside of mixed martial arts, like an overall MMA game, I think the more dangerous fighter, in my opinion, is Mendonca, and I like the technique that he showcases on the feet, and I think he'll probably be able to stop the takedowns. If Aguilar gets a lot of takedowns, then he probably wins via ground and pound or a submission, because that's the type of fighter that he is. He is known as a grappler, not a striker, but he showcases power. But again, you can't take the knockout win for Aguilar super duper seriously because he knocked out Shannon Ross, who could go down with a gust of wind. And that's not me knocking on Shannon Ross. It's just he doesn't have a good chin, and he got knocked out with the first punch he got hit with. But I'm going to side with Mendonca. I think that he's going to be able to outstrike Aguilar on the feet. I think he's going to be able to hurt him, and I think he's going to be able to TKO him. But it would not surprise me in the slightest if Aguilar clips him with a big shot, jumps on his neck and chokes him out, or uses wrestling and takedowns to tire out Mendonca and then ground and pounds him, or waits for him to give up his neck and locks up a rear naked choke. But I'm going to go with Mateus Mendonca by a second round TKO over Jesus Aguilar. But again, really close fight, basically like 55-45. Up next, we have the prelim headliner in the bantamweight division between Cristian Quinonez taking on Raoni Barcelos. I think that this is a Barcelos spot, but again, Barcelos is an older fighter, 18-4 for Quinonez for the Problema, and 17-5 for Barcelos, but he lost 4 out of his last 5, so he's 1-4 in his last 5 fights, and Cristian Quinonez is 4-1 in his last 5 fights. His last loss came via submission to Kyung-Ho Kang, Mr. Perfect, about 7 months ago, and Raoni Barcelos lost to Kyler Phillips, but that was via decision in a very close and competitive fight. But before that, he got knocked out with Umar Nurmagomedov off the little knee up the middle to the little short left hook that caught Barcelos on the chin. Then he dominated Trevin Jones via unanimous decision. Before that, lost a unanimous decision to the UFC debuting Victor Henry. And then prior to that, lost a majority decision to Timur Valiev, even though he did hurt Valiev and drop him and almost get him out of there with a TKO. I think that Quinonez is a good striker. He moves around pretty well. He uses his jab. He uses his distance and range, fires that right hand. And the one thing he does have is he doesn't like overextend on his right hand. He throws a very short overhand right. That's exactly how he knocked out Khalid Taha in his last fight, or his last win. He caught him with like a little short overhand right as he closed the distance and dropped him and then jumped on him and got him out of there. Quinonez is able to grapple and he does have striking. I just don't necessarily see him being better than Barcelos in any one area of mixed martial arts. Barcelos is very good with his footwork and movement. He moves laterally very well, moves in and out, punctuates his combinations with kicks. He uses a lot of good head movement, right hand over the top of the jab, left hook to the body, left hook up top, 1, 2, 3, jab, left hook, right hand. He's very, very clean, and he's a textbook striker. He reminds me a little bit of like Jose Aldo with the style that he fights in, with the marching forward, slipping and countering, a lot of head movement, a lot of upper trunk movement with slipping and rolling, and I think he's a lot sharper and a lot cleaner than a guy like Quinonez, but at the same time, Barcelos is an older fighter at this point in his MMA career, and he's coming off 2 back-to-back losses. Like I said, he's 1-4 in his last 5, so this isn't a guy where you can be 100% certain that he's going to win. But if he does win, it's usually decision. But this is a fight where I think I could see Barcelos getting a knockout because Quinonez does keep his chin in the air. He doesn't move his head very well, but he does use long, rangy strikes to keep his opponents at a distance. But in this fight, they're going to have an identical height, but a 2-inch reach advantage for Barcelos. And I think Barcelos is just a lot cleaner of a fighter. Quinonez wins, came over Khalid Taha. He won on the Contender Series against Long Zhao via unanimous decision, won a fight against Donnie Matos via unanimous decision, and then won a fight over Erick Ruano? Yeah, Erick Ruano. The record of these guys that Quinonez is beating is actually pretty impressive. 14-1 for Ruano, 20-7 for Donnie Matos, 22-6 for Long Zhao, and 13-4 for Taha, losing to an 18-9 Mr. Perfect Kyung-Ho Kang. When you look at Raoni Barcelos, he lost to Kyler Phillips 10-2, Umar Nurmagomedov 15-0, beat Trevin Jones, lost to Victor Henry 21-5, and went to a majority decision but a loss to Timur Valiev, who's 17-2. So when it comes to the wins and overall, quality of wins, I think Barcelos is higher quality, but I don't think that Quinonez was just crushing cans on the regional scene before he got to the UFC. So I do think Quinonez is going to come in here and look to knock out Raoni Barcelos. And like I said, he's got good wrestling, decent wrestling, but he likes to keep it on the feet, jab, uses jab, 1-2s down the middle. The short right hand is very good, and he is dangerous, and we do have concerns about the chin of Raoni Barcelos, but he went back and forth with Kyler Phillips, who is a very, very bright prospect in the bantamweight division and who actually has a fight coming up against Pedro Munoz at UFC 299, the next pay-per-view that we have. Looking at the age of both fighters, 36 for Barcelos to 27 for Quinonez. So the age is definitely on the side of Quinonez, who's 9 years younger than Raoni Barcelos. So you have to wonder, is age eventually going to be a factor? And will the chin get cracked of Cristian Quinonez? If I was going to put money on it, I would take the slight favorite in Barcelos because I just feel like he's sharper, he's cleaner, he's better technically, he's fought the better competition, and overall I feel like I like his game. I think he's more well-rounded and sharper than Quinonez. But Quinonez is powerful. Quinonez is dangerous. He uses his jab, his 1-2s, very long, rangy striker. And he has the power to hurt Barcelos in this spot. So it's not a super duper confident pick. It's not one I would tell you to rush and go bet on. But I am going to take Raoni Barcelos to defeat Cristian Quinonez via a 29-28 unanimous decision. I think we could see him mix up his grappling like we've seen in the past and look to take down Quinonez to secure some of the rounds and then eventually slow him down and put his combinations together on the feet. So give me Raoni Barcelos to defeat Cristian Quinonez via 29-28 unanimous decision. But again, close fight, and I could see Barcelos getting caught.
This guy TKOs people. When I knock people out, they don't fucking move.
All right, the first fight up on the main card is in the lightweight division between Manuel El Loco Torres taking on Chris the Problem Duncan. I believe his nickname is the Problem, but Duncan versus Torres is a really solid fight, and I see a lot of people on Manuel Torres, and obviously I'll get to my breakdown when we get to that point, but I don't know, man. This is a close fight because I feel like early on, like first round, if there's a finish, I think it comes from Manuel Torres. Torres is a very, very solid striker. He uses good low kicks, a good jab, a good left hook, good 1-2s down the middle. He can throw his hooks kind of like a shovel hook, where it's a mix between a hook and an uppercut, and he kind of comes on that upward trajectory, and he can rip it with a lead hook, come over the top with the overhand right. And the one thing we know about Chris Duncan is he has power in himself, but at the same time, he's a guy who, you know, historically has been caught, clipped, and dropped in a lot of his early fights. Early in a lot of his fights. Duncan is a guy who wins on heart and attrition. Manuel Torres is a guy who wins on violence, knockout ability, and just the ability to put you to sleep. And I feel like in this fight, in the second and third round, I feel like the tide completely turns. It's a battle of early knockout power and finishing ability versus late attrition, heart, durability, and ability to push the pace. If this fight gets to the third round, I feel like it's going to be Duncan moving forward, changing stances, using those kicks to the body, some good head kicks, closing the distance off after the head kicks, like throwing a lead head kick. Then as he pulls it down, he shoots in on the takedown, gets to the body lock, pushes Manuel Torres up against the cage, lands elbows, lands knees, uses inside trips, outside trips, and starts to tire out a guy like Torres. Because the one thing we know is that Torres has a lot of power and a lot of upside in the first two rounds. But towards the halfway point of the fight and past that, I feel like the tides start to completely turn. But due to the fact that we've seen Chris Duncan get hurt in his fights early, even though he can come back, I feel like a guy with the technique of Manuel Torres, but along with the power that he possesses, because he's not only a powerful striker, he's a very technical kickboxer. Good low kicks, like I said. That step-in elbow that he landed on Nicolas Mota to close the distance was just absolutely vicious. But he doesn't have the best defense. He keeps his chin in the air. He does get clipped with some shots. And Duncan has power in his own right. Duncan's a very good boxer. Switches between orthodox and southpaw. Uses good body kicks, good low kicks. Switches stances to cut off the opponent and try to trap them up against the cage. And I do give the cardio edge to Chris Duncan. I 100% think that the longer the fight goes, it does go to the side of Duncan, and I've picked Chris Duncan in a lot of fights, both as a favorite and as an underdog, but I think I have to go with Manuel Torres here. I just feel like the knockout power paired with the technical ability against a guy who gets hit as much as Chris Duncan is, or as much as Chris Duncan does, against a guy who gets hurt, rocked, wobbled, and has to come back. I think Manuel Torres is a guy where if he hurts you, I don't think you're going to have the opportunity to come back. Good left hooks, good right hooks, good overhands, really good low kicks. I think he mixes up his striking very, very well, and the biggest question is going to be, is his takedown defense going to be on point? Because like I said, Duncan will win the second half of this fight if it gets that far with takedowns, forward pressure, attrition, cage pushing, cage control, inside and outside trips, and just slowing down and kind of breaking Manuel Torres down the stretch. But due to his durability issues and due to the technique and powerful striking of Manuel Torres, I'm going to side with El Loco here. It pains me because I don't pick against Chris Duncan. I don't think I've picked against Manuel Torres either in his UFC career. But after that step-in elbow against Nicolas Mota, who, yes, He did just knock out Tom Nolan, so we know he's not as bad as we thought that he was, but I still don't think that's a huge win for Manuel Torres, but the way he got it done, speaks volumes about his ability on the feet. I think he's going to be able to catch a guy like Duncan, who is a defensive liability and who has been hurt multiple times in fights. We've seen Duncan hurt a lot more than Torres, but it's the question of, we know that Duncan can come back from being the nail. How does Torres handle being the nail when he's not able to hammer down the opponent? But I'm still going to side with Torres. I think he finds the chin of Duncan in that first round, maybe second round. With elbows, I think knees up the middle, but he's probably not going to throw as many knees because I feel like Duncan's going to push a forward pressure and heavy wrestling game plan. But I do like Torres here to close the distance, land one of those left hooks or right hooks on the chin of Duncan, hurt him, and just not allow him to recover. So I'm going to take Manuel Torres to win this fight via a first-round knockout against Chris Duncan. I like Torres on the money line. He opened at like minus 120. He's all the way up to minus 160, minus 170. If it gets to minus 200, I wouldn't play it. But anything under minus 200, I think Manuel Torres is the side because of the technique along with his power. So give me Manuel El Loco Torres to defeat Chris the Problem Duncan via a first-round knockout. Yazmin Uruguay taking on Sam Hughes. I know I picked Jacqueline Amorim to beat Sam Hughes, and she almost did a bunch of times in the first round, and then she gassed and got tired, and then that was it, and Sam Hughes ended up winning the fight by decision. But I know everybody's going to think Yazmin Uruguay got finished in her last fight against Denise Gomes. It was early in the first round. She got clipped with a big right hand, and she got knocked out. How is that knockout going to affect her? We don't really know. Sam Hughes is tough. She's durable, and she's a good wrestler, has good top pressure, good ground and pound, good ability to control from the top and maybe set up submissions of her own. But on the feet, this is the Uruguay show all day. Yazmin Uruguay is going to piece up Sam Hughes on the feet. There's really no competition in terms of the striking in this fight, and the combinations, the boxing, punctuating the combinations with kicks, that all comes from Uruguay. The speed, the technique, the power. I think Sam Hughes is basically a sitting duck on the feet compared to Uruguay, but we don't know how she's going to be. She might be gun-shy coming off of that brutal knockout, which was, I believe, also her first loss in her MMA career, not just loss inside the UFC. And the longer the fight goes, kind of like the Torres and Duncan fight, it does play into the favor of Sam Hughes, but I think Uruguay is way too crisp, way too clean, way too sharp for a fighter like Sam Hughes, and I think this is just a fight in Mexico City to get the hometown girl a big standing ovation. I think Uruguay is going to piece her up. She's going to rip that left hook to the body. She's going to rip the combinations up top, rip, and then punctuate the combinations with a shot to the body. Touch, 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 rip, touch, 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 rip, rip. And I think Uruguay is going to kind of get a death via 1,000 cuts, death via accumulation, and get a TKO finish over Sam Hughes towards the midpoint of the second round into the early portions of the third round, but I think it'll end in round 2. Just the crispness, the technique, the power, the variety, everything on the feet is in the favor of Uruguay. It's just the midpoint of the fight. Past that, late portions of the second into the third, if she doesn't get a finish, Sam Hughes might be able to outgrind her, but I don't think that's going to be the case. Sam Hughes is not that great of a fighter, and, Jacqueline Amorim gassed herself out by hunting for submissions and, showed that she didn't have the gas tank to continue the fight. Sam Hughes is tough, she's durable, but Amorim's not a good striker. She's a good grappler. Now you have a girl who can grapple, but also has really, really high-level striking in terms of the boxing and kickboxing and putting combinations together on the feet. So I think Uruguay gets her out of there. I think she gets a big win in her hometown, in her home country of Mexico. I'm going to go with Yazmin Uruguay via second-round TKO over Sam Hughes. Up next in the bantamweight division, you have a battle between the rising, very young prospect in Raul Rosas Jr., coming off that first round knockout over Terrence Mitchell, taking on Ricky Turcios, who is a former Ultimate Fighter alum. Ultimate Fighter winner as well, I believe. This is going to be a very interesting fight, but I'm actually surprised by the amount of people that are playing the Ricky Turcios side, even at such high underdog odds. I'm not saying I don't think Turcios is good, but aside from the win on the Ultimate Fighter, what have we really seen in his career that makes you want to justify putting any amount of money on Tercios? And if you look at the fight with him and Ayman Zahabi, I believe that was a fight where I predicted Tercios to win, and he just didn't show up. Like, there wasn't a ton of scrambles, there wasn't a ton of really anything, and he kind of just stayed on the feet and tried to point fight the much higher level point fighter. Now, the one thing I do think that plays into the advantage of Tercios is that Raul Rosas Jr. is a very aggressive fighter. He's young, very young, and he's very aggressive. Like, it's like a dog on the bone. And that aggressiveness is what led him to losing that decision to Cristian C-Rod Rodrigues, where he wasn't able to get the submission once he took his back. He wasn't able to finish him, and then he gassed out, and he still tried, he still pushed, but he just got outpaced, got out-grappled, got out-wrestled, and got controlled from the top, and showed that although he's a very good topside grappler, although he's a very good grappler when he's on somebody's back, when he's in the mount, when he's in the topside position, he's not the best when he starts to get tired and when he's the one put on his back. He doesn't have the best bottom game. He's more of a top game grappler, like we just said. Now, that's could be a problem, I guess. I'm not going to say it's going to be, but it could be a problem against a fighter in Ricky Tercios, who does have good kicks, who kind of fights from the outside, a lot of Hadouken and like Dragon Ball Z anime inspired, throws wild kicks, punches, combinations. But I think Rosas Jr. is going to be too aggressive for a fighter in Ricky Tercios, even though Tercios is a veteran compared to Raul Rosas Jr. I think there's a difference in terms of the skill level of a fighter like Tercios compared to a fighter like a Cristian C-Rod Rodrigues. Now, Rodrigues has a fight coming up against Isaac Dolgarian, which I actually think is a very, very interesting matchup, and I'm not really sure what side I'm going to be picking in that matchup. But with this one, I think we saw a lot of improvements in the game of Raul Rosas in that knockout over Terrence Mitchell. I played him by TKO, which I think was like plus 550, because he was expected to just take him down and get a submission, just like Cameron Simon did against Terrence Mitchell. But I think Rosas Jr. showed improvements even though the fight was shorter. I mean, he got to the outside foot of the opposite stance fighter, threw that left hand or right hand right down the middle, threw the backhand right down the middle, dropped the opponent, and then just TKO'd him, flattened him out, and got him out of there from the full mount. And even though it was a short fight and we didn't really get to see how much improvements were made to the cardio, we saw that he's a little bit more comfortable striking on the feet now as compared to just walking forward and looking to get takedowns and submissions and being too aggressive. I think with the improvements I expect to see in this fight, even though it goes longer, I still think Rosas Jr. is going to be able to find a way to the back of Ricky Tercios and get a rear naked choke submission. I think that he's going to be more patient, which is going to play into the long game for his cardio, and he's not going to be too over-aggressive. And I think Tercios is going to give him a tough fight early, but I think eventually, paired with the comfortability that I think he probably is going to showcase in this fight more than we've seen in previous outings, I think we're going to see Raul Rosas Jr. be able to strike on the feet competitively because Ricky Tercios is not the best striker. He does a whole lot of things that make it look like he's doing something, and he's really not doing too much. And I think that Rosas Jr. is going to land the bigger shots on the feet. And if they do get into those grappling exchanges, even though there might be some scrambles where Rosas Jr. might end up on his back, I think he's going to be able to win the majority of the grappling exchanges and most of the time end up in that top position, either working to the mount or working to the back of Ricky Tercios, whilst landing the more impactful and bigger shots, at least in the eyes of the judges. If it makes it to the decision, I don't think it does, though. I'm going to take Raul Rosas Jr. via a first-round rear naked choke submission. I think he is going to find the back of Tercios, but he's not going to hunt for it as aggressively as he normally does. It's going to come to him, and I think he's going to get that first-round submission with that rear naked choke. Give me Raul Rosas Jr. to get a win in his hometown of Mexico via a first-round rear naked choke submission. Up next, we've got a battle in the UFC's lightweight division between Daniel Zellhuber taking on Francisco Prado. Prado coming in 12-1, with Daniel Zellhuber on the other side coming in with a record of 14-1, with his only loss coming via decision in his UFC debut to Trey Ogden. The biggest difference in this fight is going to be the usage of distance and range and fighting at a distance. Not only is Prado going to be shorter by about 3 inches, he's also going to be at an 8-inch reach disadvantage. 77-inch reach for Zellhuber to 69-inch reach, or to a 69-inch reach for Francisco Prado. I think Zellhuber, if he can keep it at kicking range, is probably going to run away with this fight. Like, if he can keep Prado at the end of his kicks or just outside of his punches, then he's probably going to be able to dictate most of the fight, dictate the range, and kind of just point fight his way to a comfortable decision. He's also live for a finish. You know, we've seen that his finishing instincts and his overall, like, aggressiveness has gotten higher in his UFC career. I mean, you saw him drop Lando Venata early and almost get him out of there, but Lando survived, and then Lando came back, and it was very competitive the longer the fight goes. This kid is a very good hammer, but not so good of a nail, and I don't think that really has changed. I think he's got more experience, which is going to make him probably, you know, a little bit tougher in terms of mental toughness and ability to get through the storm, but at the same time, I think Francisco Prado is actually a very, very difficult matchup for this kid. You know, 14-1 to 12-1. Prado did lose to Jamie Malarkey, and he kind of got outstruck, you know, kept on the end of the strikes, and everybody's kind of taking that fight and thinking that just means Zellhuber's going to run away because he has more variety in terms of his striking. He's faster than Malarkey, and he's a little bit better technically than a guy like Malarkey. And although Prado doesn't have the best, best defense, I guess you could say, he is pretty active. You know, 3.46 significant strikes landed per minute to 5.25 for Daniel Zellhuber. Zellhuber has a 39% accuracy to a 50% accuracy for Prado. But Prado's actually a little bit better defensively. He only absorbs 3.83 strikes per 15-minute fight, per minute, and Zellhuber takes 4.79. But if you look at the grappling, 94% takedown defense for Zellhuber, to a 0% takedown accuracy for Prado. Prado doesn't really get a lot of takedowns. He doesn't technically look to get any takedowns. He likes to stay on the feet and strike. But I think the mixture of the striking and the grappling, even though we did see Zellhuber submit, what's it called? Oh, who's the guy he just beat most recently? He submitted, hold on. Christos Yagos. He was able to submit him, I believe it was via a second round Darce choke. And that was a fight where he got clipped, he got hurt, he got cracked multiple times by Christos Yagos with big overhands, big hooks, and he leaves his chin in the air because he's a tall, long, rangy guy, and a lot of the times they have that tall man defense. I think Prado, he's very good at slipping on the inside, slipping on the outside, you know, trying to work his way into range. He has good calf kicks at distance. We've seen him use those before. Good spinning attacks like we saw against Atman Azaitar, but the slip inside overhand right, the counter left hook, the 1-2s down the middle, punctuating the combinations with low kicks. He's very good at the basics, and he uses the basics very well. And I think he's a little bit better than Zellhuber. I think Zellhuber has all of the physical advantages in terms of the height, the length, the reach. You know, he uses more variety than Prado. He's probably going to be more active than Prado. But I think the counter ability, the slipping and countering of Prado, the body shots, the low kicks, I think with the defensive irresponsibility of Daniel Zellhuber, that I actually think Prado is very live here. He has a 53% striking defense, it says, for Zellhuber to a 46% defense for Prado. But I think with the style of Prado trying to work on the inside, as long as he can get past that kicking range, which I don't necessarily think is going to be that hard for him because Zellhuber isn't that great at keeping people away from him. He does get hit quite a lot in terms of at least what I've seen from him inside the UFC. Even though he has gotten better and even though he has made improvements, I don't see any world where Zellhuber should be like a minus 250, minus 260 favorite. I think that at plus 200 or plus 220, what are the odds for Prado? Plus 220 right now. I think at plus 220, I feel like it's Francisco Prado in terms of the betting side all day. I know people think Zellhuber's like this next level guy, and he's very talented. And don't get me wrong, the guy can strike. The guy's good at distance. The guy has grappling we've seen. But I think Prado's better than people think. And I mean, the guy's only 21 years old or 20 years old, something like that. And he's got a lot of room for growth. And I know Zellhuber's a young kid as well. But I like the inside fighting of Prado. I think he can out-grapple Zellhuber. I think he's got better cardio to go throughout the 15-minute fight. And I think he's got much better finishing instinct than this Zellhuber kid Because we saw in the fight with Trey Ogden in his debut, he couldn't get him out of there, and he couldn't really adjust his game plan. And I feel like the same thing kind of happened in the Lando Venata fight, where he started off hot, rocked him, hurt him, almost finished him, but then the longer the fight went, he kind of just allowed Venata to get himself back into the fight and make it more competitive after he almost finished him in the first round. And with Giagos, we saw that his finishing instinct is definitely up there. Like, it's getting better because he hurt him with the overhand punch or rocked him and then locked up that submission right away. But I think Prado's technically better, and I think Prado is going to have more opportunities to win this fight than Zellhuber. I like the style of this Francisco Prado kid, and like I said, at this underdog price tag, I think it's worth a shot. So I'm going to pick the underdog. I'm going to go with the Argentinian Francisco Prado to defeat Daniel Zellhuber via a second round ground and pound TKO. Maybe third round. We'll go third round. No. You know what? I'm going to stick with the second round. We'll go second round. Maybe it makes it to a decision. I could see Zellhuber lasting and surviving, but I've seen this Zellhuber kid get cracked so many times that I feel like Prado's power and technical precision with his boxing, he's going to be able to crack Zellhuber's chin. And I think he does it. I'm going to go with Francisco Prado via second round TKO over Daniel Zellhuber. I like this kid, and I think he's better almost everywhere aside from being stuck at kicking range. If he's stuck at kicking range for the entire fight, then we know what's going to happen. But if he can close that distance, man, I think Zellhuber's in trouble. So give me the underdog at plus 220 in Francisco Prado to defeat Daniel Zellhuber via a second round TKO via ground and pound. Now we've made it to the co-main event of the evening in a rematch that originally took place in Mexico City, I believe, but between Yair El Pantera Rodrigues, the former interim featherweight champion, taking on Brian T-City Ortega, who's returning to the octagon after a few years away. I think he's been gone for at least a year, maybe 2 years. He's been gone for a long time. But yeah, I'm going to be honest, I went back and I watched their first fight. And, you know, I feel like Brian Ortega gets too much credit for how people anticipated him looking or said that he looked in that fight. Like, yeah, he got the takedown, but then Yair reversed and went for an armbar, and Ortega's shoulder popped out. And on the feet, Yair was so much faster than Ortega. Ortega did land, I think, a good right hand at a certain point, and his boxing has definitely gotten better. But I just don't see a world where Yair Rodrigues doesn't win this fight. I think people are going to look back at the, you know, Alexander Volkanovski and, like, him getting takedowns on Yair, and they're going to look at Josh Emmett dropping and hurting Yair. They're going to look at certain things and be like, okay, that Frankie Edgar fight where Yair just got controlled on the ground for the entire time, and, you know, the ground and pound of Frankie Edgar was just insane. But we've seen that Yair's grappling has gotten much better, and he threatens with submissions off of his back. He caught Josh Emmett in a triangle choke and submitted him to claim the interim featherweight championship after hurting him with vicious kicks to the body. And I think Brian Ortega is definitely a better grappler in terms of jiu-jitsu, not so much wrestling, than, you know, Frankie Edgar and Josh Emmett. But at the same time, I think Yair's just too quick and too slick for a fighter like Brian Ortega. Like, he got pieced up on the feet by Alexander Volkanovski. He got pieced up on the feet by Max Holloway. He did piece up the Korean Zombie, but at this point, is the Korean Zombie really that great? I mean, you know, he's retired now, but you know where I'm going with that. But at the same time, I think Yair is just going to rip apart Brian Ortega on the feet. Now, if Ortega gets the takedowns, if Ortega finds a way to the back of Yair, if Ortega, you know, grabs a front headlock in an exchange, whether it's in the clinch or if Yair slips up on a kick or something and he jumps on his neck, like, Ortega can snatch up a submission like that. Like that. Like, just look at how he got that mounted guillotine against Alexander Volkanovski. He caught a kick, knocked him down with a punch, jumped on him, boom, immediately mounted guillotine. Then he got out of the guillotine, and then immediately he locked up a triangle and almost submitted him. The only path to victory for Brian Ortega is his most likely path to victory, which is a submission. Finding a way to grab the front headlock and get a guillotine, finding a way to maybe gets knocked down by Yair. Yair tries to follow up on the ground, and he catches him in an armbar, catches him in a triangle. Like, Brian Ortega's jiu-jitsu is no joke. His wrestling isn't the best. and his avenue to get to those positions for the submissions isn't that great, but if he gets to those positions, he's one of the best in the world. I don't think Yair's going to give him a chance to get to those grappling positions, and I think if he does, yes, Yair's in trouble, but I think Yair has made a lot of improvements in his defensive grappling as well as his offensive grappling. I mean, even when he got taken down by Ortega in the first fight, he fell into that armbar. And, although Brian Ortega's shoulder separated, it kind of separated from the submission position that Yair put Ortega in off that takedown attempt. So you have to take that into consideration as well. I think Yair Rodrigues is going to finish Brian Ortega because this is not a 3-round fight. This is a 5-round fight. And I don't think that Brian Ortega can take the damage of Yair Rodrigues for 5 rounds. I don't even necessarily think he can take it for 4 rounds. I don't even know if he can take it for 3 rounds. If Ortega survives and Yair gets tired, then yes, he's live for a late submission. Maybe round 3, 4, and 5. He can find a way to, outgrind, take down Rodrigues, get into the clinch, use some clinch trips from the inside and outside, work the front headlock, find a way to take the back, work cage wrestling. Of course, if he can embrace the grind, like we've talked about on this breakdown before, then I do think that Ortega's live for a submission. I mean, if you're going to bet Ortega as a dog, you just take Ortega by submission most of the time. His striking has improved. He's got good boxing, good 1-2, good uppercuts as well, like we saw him catch Frankie Edgar with. He's got decent head kicks, but you can't strike with a fighter like Yair Rodrigues. The speed, the technique, the variety, the spinning kicks, the 2-touch roundhouse kicks, the 1-2s, the spinning back fists, the upward elbows, the flying knees. I mean, it's just no competition. I think Yair is going to knock out Brian Ortega. In a battle of Mexico versus Mexico, I think El Pantera is going to make T-City burn to the ground. Give me Yair El Pantera Rodrigues to defeat Brian T-City Ortega via a second-round TKO in the co-main event of UFC Mexico City. I just feel like Ortega's not really in this game mentally anymore. He's been gone for a while. He hasn't had a really good performance in a long time. Maybe he comes back with a ton of improvements and proves everybody wrong, but I think more times than not, Yair is more active. He's fought the better competition. He went back and forth in a war with Max Holloway, and Max Holloway kind of just boxed up Ortega, aside from a few shots where they did go back and forth at certain points. He almost got a submission, but, I think Yair is just better all around than Brian Ortega is. So give me Yair El Pantera Rodrigues to defeat Brian T-City Ortega via second-round TKO. I think he's going to catch him with a big head kick or a spinning kick or a flying knee. It's going to be a kick of some sort, and Ortega's not going to see it, and he's going to get dropped and get finished. So give me Yair Rodrigues, second-round TKO over Brian T-City Ortega. And I do not think Ortega should be the favorite. And like I said, if you're going to play Ortega as the dog, you take him by submission. And now we are at the main event of the evening in another rematch, this time from UFC 255, between the former UFC flyweight champion and Brandon, the Assassin Baby Moreno, taking on Brandon Raw Dog Royval. You have Brandon squared in the main event of UFC Fight Night Mexico City. I'm going to be honest, man. I watched the first fight, and there wasn't too much you could take from that fight, aside from the fact that Royval was overly aggressive and kind of gave positions to Moreno that led to him, separating his shoulder, but he was given his back up, he gave up positions, but Royval kind of does that all the time. He's just a very wild, over-aggressive fighter. He did the same thing with Pantoja, constantly gave up takedowns, got put into submissions, gave up his back, but he was able to survive. He was able to rock Pantoja on the feet, hurt him with some knees up the middle on the takedown attempts, but whenever Pantoja got a hold of him, he kind of just out-grappled him, outpaced him, controlled him, and ended up winning either 5 or 4 out of the 5 rounds. It was a dominant performance from Pantoja, but a performance of heart and attrition from Royval. Now, how much better has Royval gotten from the first fight compared to Moreno? I think both fighters have improved. I think we're going to get a much different fight. I think we're going to get a much longer fight. I'm not saying I think it goes decision, but I think we get a much longer fight than the first one, which isn't too much to ask for. But I think the technical skill of the boxing of Moreno is a lot better than Royval. And Royval gets clipped, he gets hurt, he gets rocked. But if Moreno rocks him and then overly aggressive, and then he aggressively closes the distance in the pocket, he could get caught with an elbow, he could get caught with a knee, he could get caught with a lead elbow, he could get caught with a lead knee right up the middle like he caught Nicolau with. Royval's a very dangerous guy. And I think at plus 200, people are going to be running to the window saying that there's huge value on Brandon Royval as an underdog. And I do think there's value because I do think he has finishing upside or bigger moment upside in this fight to maybe swing rounds. If it goes to a decision, he might swing the rounds his way because he lands a big spinning elbow that cuts Moreno, or he lands a big knee, or he threatens with a submission. But I think the overall better fighter is Brandon Moreno. I think that he has improved more than Royval has improved since their first fight. I think this is going to be a much more competitive fight. I think this fight is kind of like 60-40, 55-45. I think it's a very close matchup. I think that the fight with Pantoja, where he lost but he went to decision, I think Royval has made a lot of improvements, and I think that taught him a lot. Moreno never has beaten Pantoja, but he just went 5 rounds with Pantoja as well in a back-and-forth fight, but Pantoja won 3 or 4 out of the 5 rounds just by the forward pressure, the aggressiveness. I think the biggest reason why Pantoja beat Moreno was just the forward pressure getting in his face and not allowing Moreno to dictate the pace. I think that is something that Royval is capable of, and I think that's why this fight is more competitive, because he will get in the face of Moreno. He will have finishing instinct. He does have dangerous strikes with elbows, spinning elbows, lead elbows, knees up the middle, threatening with guillotines, threatening with submissions. But I think just the overall fighter who's going to be a step ahead throughout the majority of the fight is going to be Moreno. I think Moreno is going to get hurt at certain points. He might get cut. I think if anybody in this division can finish Brandon Moreno, I think it's Royval. I think if anybody can finish him, I think it's Royval. But I also think at the same time that Moreno is live for a finish due to the wild style and over-aggressive scrambling of Brandon Royval, and the fact that his boxing has gotten so much sharper, cleaner, crisper since the first time that they fought. Very good off his lead side with the jab, the lead hook, the lead kick to the body behind the lead hook, kind of hiding it. Lead head kicks, the 2 into the lead head kick. He's very good off the lead side, much better than his rear side, even though he has a good right hand. But I think the lacking defense, and the fact that Royval kind of overcommits on his scrambles, I think he's going to get hurt by a left hook or a head kick from Moreno, kind of go into the autopilot of getting into the takedowns, getting into the scrambles, and kind of rolling around. And I think he's going to give up the back to Moreno, and Moreno's going to finish him with a rear naked choke. I'm going to take Brandon, the assassin baby Moreno, to defeat Brandon Royval via a 3rd round rear naked choke submission in his hometown of Mexico City. I do think Royval is live. I'm not saying I think this is a mismatch. I'm not saying I think this is a whitewash. I think this is going to be a crazy and wild fight for as long as it lasts. But I just see Royval making more mistakes than Moreno throughout the longevity of the fight. And I think it's going to cause him to get hurt, clipped, and give up his back in the scrambles like we've seen him do so many times before. Even though he's aggressive, even though he has great jiu-jitsu, he's too much on the offensive and not so much on the defensive, and he's going to give Moreno his back and get caught in a rear naked choke. So give me Brandon, the assassin baby Moreno, to win the UFC Mexico City main event via a 3rd round rear naked choke submission. I'm picking Moreno, but I would much rather have Royval win this fight. I'm a bigger fan of Royval. Like, I want Royval to win, but I just can't pick him. So yeah, Brandon Moreno, 3rd round rear naked choke submission for the main event. And yeah, that's it. That's my predictions, or those are my predictions, I should say, for UFC Fight Night Mexico City, which takes place this upcoming Saturday. And I can't wait to see it. I'm sure you guys can't wait either. If you watched this video all the way through, thank you. If you caught certain parts of it, thank you. If you fast forwarded too far and you're at the main event, thank you very much for tuning in. You can get this podcast on YouTube, as I did not do the audio version of this podcast this week. But those are my predictions for UFC Fight Night Mexico City, and let's get ready for the fights on Saturday.